When my husband's friends poured red wine on my new dress at dinner and everyone laughed, I stayed calm. My husband said I was overreacting when I walked out. 3 days later, he came home to find me packing. He asked where I was going. I said, "Ask your lawyer." Before I tell you how a wine stain destroyed my marriage and changed my life forever, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe what happened when I finally stopped being the cool wife who let everything slide. Trust me, this story gets wild. I need you to understand something right from the start. I'm not the kind of woman who makes rash decisions. At 32 years old, I was a marketing director at a Fortune 500 company. I had my life together. I wore tailored blazers to work. I meal prepped on Sundays, and I color-coded my calendar. When I married Kevin 4 years ago, I thought I was making the smartest decision of my life. He was charming, ambitious, had a good job in finance, and he made me laugh. We had the kind of life that looked perfect on Instagram. Beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 cars in the garage, yearly vacations to places with clear blue water. We were even talking about starting a family. But here's the thing about perfect-looking lives. They're usually hiding something underneath. And in my case, what I was hiding was how small I had to make myself to fit into Kevin's world. I was the only black woman in our entire social circle. Kevin's friends were all guys he went to college with, and their wives were all cut from the same cloth. They wore similar clothes, laughed at the same jokes, and had the same opinions about everything. And me? I was different. I knew it, they knew it, and Kevin definitely knew it. But instead of celebrating that difference, instead of making sure I felt included and protected, Kevin wanted me to just blend in, be cool, don't make waves, laugh at the jokes even when they made my stomach turn. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs I ignored. Like the time Kevin's friend Chris asked me where I was really from at a barbecue, not accepting that I was born in Ohio, or when Angela, Chris's wife, touched my hair without asking and said it felt so exotic. Kevin would always jump in with the same line, "They don't mean anything by it." He'd pull me aside and ask me not to make things awkward, said his friends were just curious, just ignorant, just joking, always just something harmless that I was apparently taking too seriously. So I became the cool wife, the one who didn't make a fuss, the one who laughed along even when the joke was at my expense, the one who never corrected anyone or called out their nonsense because I didn't want to be labeled as sensitive or angry. You know what I'm talking about. That label that gets thrown at black women the second we express any emotion that makes white people uncomfortable. I spent 4 years avoiding that label, and it nearly destroyed me. The night everything fell apart started out like so many others. It was Kevin's birthday, and he wanted to do dinner at this upscale Italian restaurant downtown. The kind of place with cloth napkins and waiters who describe every dish like it's a work of art. I wore a new dress for the occasion. White, designer, something I'd saved up for months to buy. I felt beautiful in it. I remember looking at myself in the mirror before we left and thinking, "You've got this. Just get through tonight." There were 8 couples at dinner, and I was the only black person there. That wasn't unusual, but it never stopped feeling lonely. I sat there smiling, making small talk, complimenting the other wives on their outfits, playing my role perfectly. Then Chris, Kevin's best friend since freshman year of college, decided to bring up cancel culture, just threw it right into the middle of dinner conversation, like a grenade. He started going on about how people can't take jokes anymore, how everyone's too sensitive these days, how the world's gone crazy with all this political correctness. Then he pivoted to talking about DEI hires, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion for anyone who doesn't know. And as he talked, he kept looking directly at me, not glancing, staring. He said people only get jobs nowadays because of their diversity points, not because they're actually qualified. The implication was crystal clear. He was talking about people like me. I felt every single person at that table look at me. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. Others watched to see what I'd do. And Kevin laughed nervously and took a long drink of his wine. Didn't say a word to defend me, didn't change the subject, didn't tell his best friend that his wife, sitting right there, had earned every single thing she had through hard work and talent. I tried to redirect the conversation, asked someone about their recent vacation, complimented the food, anything to move past that moment. But the damage was done. I felt humiliated, exposed, and completely alone, even though I was sitting right next to my husband. That's when Angela, Chris's wife, reached for her wine glass. What happened next? I'll never know if it was truly an accident or something more deliberate, but her hand knocked that glass of red wine directly onto my lap. I watched it happen in slow motion, the deep red liquid splashing across my white dress, soaking into the fabric, spreading like blood across the front of me. The table went silent, completely silent, just for 1 second, maybe 2. And then Chris laughed, actually laughed, and he said, "Guess that dress wasn't as white as it wanted to be." That's when everyone else started laughing too. Nervous laughs, uncomfortable laughs, but laughs nonetheless, including my husband. Angela said, "Oops," with this little smirk on her face, not even trying to sound sincere. No real apology, no attempt to help, just that one word, dripping with something that definitely wasn't remorse. I stood up slowly. Wine was literally dripping down my legs, onto my shoes, onto the floor. This dress I'd saved for, this night I'd tried so hard to enjoy, ruined. But more than that, my dignity was lying in pieces on that table. I looked at Kevin, waiting for him to say something, anything, waiting for him to defend me, to call out his friend's disgusting comment, to at least acknowledge that this wasn't okay. Instead, he said, "Babe, it was an accident. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." Those 4 words echoed in my head as I walked away from that table. I went to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and tried not to cry. I could hear them in the dining room, their voices carrying through the restaurant. They were laughing again, having a good time, like nothing had happened, like I wasn't standing in a bathroom, ruined and humiliated, trying to clean wine off a dress that was never going to be white again. Then I heard Kevin's voice, louder than the rest. "She's so sensitive lately." That's what he said, to his friends, about me, his wife, the woman he promised to love and protect and cherish. I didn't go back to that table. I walked straight out of the restaurant, called a cab, and went home. Left Kevin there with his friends, with their jokes, with their complete and total disrespect for me. He came home 3 hours later. I was sitting in our bedroom, still in that stained dress, because I couldn't bring myself to take it off yet. It felt like evidence of something, though I wasn't sure what. Kevin walked in acting confused, like I was the one being unreasonable. He said everyone thought I overreacted, that it was just an accident, just a joke. Why couldn't I take a joke? I asked him a simple question. Why didn't you defend me? Not once. Not when Chris was making those comments about DEI. Not when he made that disgusting joke about my dress. Not at all. Why? Kevin got defensive immediately. Said he couldn't control what his friends said. That I was making too big a deal out of everything. That if I would just lighten up and stop being so serious all the time, everyone would get along better. He actually said that. Like the problem was me, not the fact that his friends had spent the evening making me feel less than human while he sat there and let it happen. That night, lying in bed next to a man who suddenly felt like a stranger, I realized something. This wasn't about the wine. The wine was just the thing that made me finally see clearly. For 4 years, I had been making myself smaller, quieter, more palatable, so that Kevin and his friends would be comfortable. I'd swallowed my pride, ignored my instincts, and dismissed my own feelings over and over again. And Kevin had let me do it. More than that, he'd encouraged it. Every time he told me I was being too sensitive, every time he asked me not to make things awkward, every time he chose his friend's comfort over my dignity, he was telling me exactly who he was. I just hadn't been ready to believe him until now. I took 2 days off work, Told them I had a family emergency, which wasn't really a lie. I called my sister, the one who'd had reservations about Kevin from the start, but loved me enough to support my choice anyway. She listened to everything, and when I finished talking, she said something I'll never forget. "You already know what you need to do. You're just calling me for permission to do it. So here it is. You have my permission to choose yourself." That afternoon, I started researching divorce lawyers. I read reviews, checked credentials, and finally found one with an impressive track record. Her name was Miss Thompson, and her consultation availability was in 2 days. I booked it immediately. Those 2 days were strange. Kevin thought everything was fine. He'd moved on from the dinner party incident completely, back to his normal routine, like nothing had happened. He kissed me goodbye in the mornings, asked about my day, suggested we watch a movie together. It was like he'd completely forgotten that he'd humiliated me, or maybe he just didn't think it was that serious. Either option was equally devastating. When I met with Miss Thompson, I told her everything. The wine incident, yes, but also the pattern. 4 years of being dismissed, 4 years of my feelings being treated like inconveniences, 4 years of being asked to shrink myself so others could expand. I even brought our prenuptial agreement, something Kevin's father had insisted on before the wedding. Ms. Thompson read through everything carefully. Then she asked if I had any documentation, texts, emails, anything that showed the pattern of behavior. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling. I had screenshots of conversations where Kevin told me I was overreacting, texts from his friends that he'd laughed about instead of shutting down, emails where I'd tried to talk about my feelings, and he'd responded by changing the subject or getting defensive. "You have a strong case," Ms. Thompson said, "especially with this prenup. There's a clause here about emotional support and partnership. If we can demonstrate a pattern of emotional abandonment, it significantly affects the terms." I left that office with a plan, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe fully. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of my life. I went through the motions at home while quietly preparing to leave. I documented everything. When Kevin dismissed my feelings via text, I screenshot it. When he told his friend on the phone that I just needed to get over the dinner party incident, I recorded it with his knowledge, which is legal in our state. I gathered financial documents, opened a separate bank account on my lawyer's advice, and slowly started moving my important possessions to a storage unit. Kevin wanted to plan a weekend trip with the same friend group. When I said no, he got angry. Actually angry. He said I was going to let one incident ruin all their friendships. I stayed calm, which seemed to frustrate him more. I just said, "Those aren't my friendships, Kevin. They're yours." He called me dramatic, said I was holding a grudge. I didn't argue. I was done arguing. There's a certain peace that comes when you've already made your decision and you're just waiting for the right moment to execute it. Then Chris texted Kevin, saying that I needed to apologize for leaving the dinner party and making everyone uncomfortable. Kevin actually showed me this text, waiting for my reaction. I think he expected me to get upset or defensive. Instead, I just said, "Interesting," and walked away. That seemed to bother him more than any argument would have. 3 weeks after the wine incident, I took a Friday off work, spent the day packing my clothes, my books, my personal items. I'd already moved the important stuff, so this was just the final sweep. When Kevin came home from work that evening, I was in our bedroom, suitcase open on the bed, boxes stacked by the door. The look on his face when he walked in would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. Complete shock. He looked around the room like he couldn't process what he was seeing. "What's going on?" he asked. "Where are you going?" I zipped up my suitcase, turned to face him, and said the words I'd been rehearsing for 3 weeks. "Ask your lawyer." "My lawyer? What are you talking about?" I picked up the envelope from the dresser and handed it to him. Divorce papers. Prepared, filed, and ready to go. His hands actually shook as he opened it. "Over a wine stain," he said, his voice getting louder. "Are you serious right now? You're ending our marriage over a wine stain." This was the moment I'd been preparing for. The moment where he'd try to make it small, make it seem like I was being irrational. Make it all about one incident instead of a pattern. But I was ready. No, Kevin, I said, and my voice was steady. Not over a wine stain. Over every time you chose your friend's comfort over my dignity. Over every joke you let slide. Over every time you made me feel crazy for having feelings. Over 4 years of being married to someone who was supposed to protect me, but instead left me to fend for myself in rooms full of people who didn't respect me. The wine was just the thing that made me finally see clearly what I'd been ignoring for years. You showed me exactly who you are. I'm choosing to believe you. Kevin tried everything then. First anger, yelling about how I was throwing away our marriage, how I was being unreasonable, how I'd regret this. When that didn't work, he tried tears, actual crying, saying he'd do better, he'd talk to his friends, we could go to counseling, then bargaining, promising to change, to stand up for me, to be different. But I was unmoved. You know why? Because I'd already mourned this marriage. I'd already cried over it, processed it, and accepted it. I'd done my grieving in those 3 weeks, while he thought everything was fine. So standing there, watching him panic, I felt nothing but certainty. I spent 4 years making myself smaller so you'd feel bigger, I told him. I'm done. The divorce process took 4 months. Kevin tried to fight the prenup terms, but his lawyer told him he didn't have a case. The wine incident, combined with all my documentation of his pattern of dismissing me, painted a clear picture of emotional neglect. I kept the house. I kept my car. My retirement account stayed untouched. Kevin's friends, predictably, called me every name in the book. I blocked all of them and never looked back. Kevin tried to paint himself as the victim on social media, posting vague things about being blindsided and not recognizing the person he married. But I had receipts, and when a few people reached out asking for my side, I simply said, "The truth is in the divorce filing," which is public record. That shut down the narrative pretty quickly. The most surprising thing? Kevin's mother reached out to me after everything was finalized. She apologized, said she'd always known her son had a tendency to avoid conflict and people please his friends, but she didn't realize how badly it had affected me. She said she hoped I'd find someone who deserved me. It was the closure I didn't know I needed. Now, 6 months later, I'm sitting in my house. My house, the one I kept in the divorce. I got promoted at work 2 months ago. I'm dating someone new, someone who actually stands up for me when his friends step out of line. Imagine that. I joined a support group for Black women who've been in relationships where they felt they had to shrink themselves. And hearing their stories has been healing in ways I can't fully describe. That wine stain taught me something important. When someone shows you they won't protect you, believe them the first time. Don't wait for the 10th time or the 100th. Don't make excuses for them. Don't tell yourself they don't mean it, or they'll change, or they just don't understand. I wasted 4 years being the cool wife who didn't make waves. Now I only make waves, and I sleep better at night. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me, have you ever been told you were overreacting when you knew something was wrong? Share your story below. We're building a community here where everyone's feelings matter. And subscribe, because I post stories like this every week about people who finally chose themselves. Remember, you're never overreacting when your dignity is on the line. See you in the next one.